Bullies pushed her into the boys' locker room. She made them scream. Riley Nakamura stood at the edge of the parking lot at Cascade Valley High School, watching the other students filter through the main entrance like they owned the place. She'd been here 3 weeks now, and every morning felt the same. The October wind pulled at her oversized jacket, and she kept her head down, dark hair falling across her face like a curtain she could hide behind. She was small, barely reaching most people's shoulders, and she moved through the hallways like she was trying not to disturb the air itself. Back in Tacoma, she'd been invisible too, but at least there she'd known which corners were safe and which hallways to avoid. Here, everything was unfamiliar territory. Her father had been transferred to the base outside town, and that meant Riley got uprooted in her senior year, dropped into a school where everyone had known each other since elementary school. She didn't talk much, partly because she was shy, partly because moving every few years had taught her that friendships were temporary, and partly because there was something coiled tight inside her that she'd learned to keep locked away. Her father didn't know about the years she'd spent training before the last move, the small dojo in Tacoma, where an old Marine Corps friend of his had taught her things that went beyond punching and kicking. He'd moved them before she could test for her black belt, before anyone at school had known she was anything other than the quiet girl who ate lunch alone. The morning bell echoed across the grounds, and Riley merged with the crowd, keeping her backpack close. The hallways smelled like industrial cleaner and teenage sweat, lockers slamming in a percussion that never quite synced. She kept to the right side, eyes on the scuffed linoleum, navigating by memory and peripheral vision. Someone bumped her shoulder hard enough to send her stumbling into a bank of lockers, but when she looked up, all she saw was a retreating back and the sound of laughter echoing off tile walls. The cafeteria was its own ecosystem, a sprawling room with long tables and fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly sick. Riley had learned the first day to get there early, claim a spot at the end of a table near the windows where the art kids usually gathered. They ignored her, which was exactly what she wanted. She pulled out her brown bag lunch, the same thing every day because cooking wasn't her mother's strength and her father worked long shifts at the base. Peanut butter sandwich, apple, granola bar. Routine, predictable, safe. Hey look, it's the ghost girl. The voice cut through the ambient noise, and Riley felt her shoulders tense before she even looked up. Madison Pierce stood 3 feet away, flanked by 2 other girls who might as well have been her shadows. Madison was everything Riley wasn't. Tall, blonde, confident in the way only someone who'd never been challenged could be. She wore her popularity like armor, her clothes always perfect, her smile sharp as broken glass. Does she ever actually talk? Or is she just programmed to sit there looking pathetic? The girls around Madison laughed, and Riley felt heat crawl up her neck. She focused on her sandwich, taking a bite she didn't taste, willing them to get bored and move on. Sometimes that worked. Sometimes ignoring them was enough. I'm talking to you, freak. Madison's hand shot out and knocked Riley's lunch bag off the table. The apple rolled across the floor, disappearing under another table, and the sandwich landed face down on the grimy tile. For a moment, the nearby conversations died down, students watching to see what would happen. Riley stared at the mess on the floor, her hands clenched in her lap beneath the table where no one could see. She counted to 10 in her head, a technique her old instructor had taught her. Breathe, center, don't react. God, you're so boring, Madison said finally, and the group moved on, their laughter fading as they claimed their usual table in the center of the room. Riley waited until the attention shifted elsewhere before she bent down to clean up the mess, her face burning, her throat tight with humiliation she wouldn't let show. The rest of the day followed the same pattern. In English class, someone kicked the back of her chair every few minutes, a steady rhythm of harassment that the teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, seemed oblivious to. In the hallway between 3rd and 4th period, She found her locker jammed, the combination refusing to work until the bell rang, and she had to sprint to class, arriving late and earning a look of disappointment from Mr. Chen, the history teacher who'd been kind to her once in the first week. By lunch the next day, someone had taped a sign to her locker. Warning, ghost zone. No personality detected. Riley peeled it off carefully, folded it, and threw it away. She didn't tell anyone. Who would she tell? Her father was dealing with his own stress at work, something classified he couldn't talk about that left him distracted and tired at dinner. Her mother had taken a part-time job at a bakery downtown, trying to build a new life in this unfamiliar town. They were barely keeping their own heads above water. Riley couldn't add her problems to their burden. And besides, what would she even say? That some popular girl was knocking her lunch on the floor? That people whispered when she walked by? It felt too small to mention and too large to carry alone. The bullying wasn't constant, which somehow made it worse. Some days she could almost pretend she was just another student, invisible but unmolested. Other days, Madison and her crew seemed to make it their personal mission to remind Riley she didn't belong. They'd trip her in the hallway, steal her pencils during class, spread rumors she was too weird to have friends. There was a boy, too, Blake Thornton, who seemed to be Madison's unofficial enforcer. He was the quarterback, broad-shouldered and cocky, the kind of guy who'd probably peaked in high school and didn't know it yet. He never participated directly, but his presence gave Madison's harassment a weight it wouldn't have had otherwise. Where Madison went, Blake followed. And where Blake was, his friends congregated. Tyler Ross, lean and mean with a smile that never reached his eyes. Jake Martinez, the team's running back who laughed at everything Blake said. And Connor Webb, who mostly just stood there looking intimidating. Riley started mapping the school like enemy territory. The library was safe until 3:30, when Madison's group sometimes came in to use the computers. The second-floor bathroom near the science wing was better than the main one. Less traffic, fewer chances for confrontation. The bench outside under the big oak tree was good for eating lunch when the weather cooperated, away from the cafeteria's social minefield. She became an expert in avoidance, in reading the hallway's energy, in knowing when to take the long way around. One afternoon in late October, she was leaving the library when she heard footsteps behind her, quick and purposeful. She didn't turn around, just walked faster, but they caught up to her in the empty hallway near the gym. Tyler and Jake, without Blake or Madison around to impress. Tyler grabbed her backpack and yanked, hard enough that the straps bit into her shoulders and she stumbled backward. "Where you going so fast, ghost girl?" Tyler's voice was lazy, amused. "We just want to talk." Riley kept her eyes on the floor, her hands loose at her sides. She could feel her pulse in her throat, adrenaline beginning its familiar crawl through her system. "I have to go," she said quietly, her first words to them ever. "She speaks!" Jake laughed, and then Tyler shoved her, not hard enough to knock her down, but enough to send her stumbling into the lockers with a metallic crash that echoed down the empty corridor. "What else can you do?" Disappear? That'd be convenient. She wanted to fight back. Everything her instructor had taught her was right there. Muscle memory and technique, the knowledge that she could put Tyler on the ground in 3 moves, if she wanted to. But she also knew what would happen if she did. Suspensions, questions, her father's disappointment, her mother's worry. They were the aggressors, but she'd be the one who'd get in trouble for escalating. So she stood there and took it, staring at a point past Tyler's shoulder until he got bored and they walked away, their laughter bouncing off the walls long after they disappeared around the corner. That night at dinner, her father asked how school was going, and Riley said it was fine. She pushed rice around her plate and listened to her parents talk about mundane things, grocery shopping, car maintenance, the neighbor's barking dog. Normal life happening around her while she felt like she was drowning in slow motion. After dinner, she went to her room and sat on the floor, going through the forms her instructor had taught her. moving through the sequences in silence. The familiar movements calmed her, reminded her that she wasn't as powerless as she felt, but she also knew that using those skills would only make everything worse. The next week brought colder weather and shorter days, and Riley found herself dreading the morning walk to school. She'd started leaving earlier, hoping to avoid the parking lot crowd, but that just meant longer stretches of time in the building before classes started. She usually spent those minutes in the library, pretending to study while actually just watching the clock. Miss Patterson, the librarian, was a tiny woman with steel-grey hair and sharp eyes, who never bothered Riley, never asked why she was always there, never made her feel like she needed to explain herself. Sometimes Riley caught the older woman watching her, with an expression that might have been concern or might have been understanding. But Miss Patterson never said anything, just went about her work, shelving books and helping other students. In gym class, which Riley had started to actively dread, they were doing a unit on volleyball. She was terrible at it, her small frame and lack of enthusiasm making her an easy target for eye rolls and frustrated sighs from whatever team got stuck with her. Coach Morrison, a weathered man who seemed to care more about the sports teams than the regular students, mostly ignored the dynamics, more focused on getting through the curriculum. During one particularly humiliating game, where Riley missed 3 serves in a row, Madison spiked the ball directly at Riley's face during a play, close enough that Riley had to duck to avoid getting hit. "Oops," Madison said sweetly. "Maybe you should pay attention." Riley's hands curled into fists at her sides, but she forced them open, forced her face into neutral. The rest of the class was endless, every minute stretching like taffy. In the locker room afterward, Riley changed quickly, avoiding eye contact, trying to be invisible again. She heard Madison and her friends laughing about something, their voices bright with casual cruelty, but she tuned them out, grabbed her bag, and left as fast as she could without actually running. November came with rain that turned the school grounds into a muddy mess and made the hallways smell like wet wool and teenage angst. Riley started bringing an umbrella, one of those cheap fold-up ones from the drugstore, but someone stole it from her locker within a week. After that, she just got wet on the walk to school, her hair plastered to her head by the time she arrived, her jacket soaked through. She stopped caring what she looked like. Caring required energy she didn't have anymore. The incident that changed things happened on a Tuesday in mid-November, during the passing period between 4th and 5th period. Riley was at her locker, trying to exchange her history textbook for her math folder, when Madison appeared with Blake, Tyler, and a girl named Ashley, who usually hovered at the edge of Madison's circle. The hallway was crowded, students rushing to their next classes, noise and movement providing cover for the kind of harassment that could be dismissed as accidental if a teacher happened to notice. Madison shouldered Riley into the lockers, hard, and before Riley could recover, Blake grabbed her backpack and tossed it to Tyler. They played keep away for a few seconds, while Riley stood there, frozen in humiliation, watching her belongings sail over her head. When Tyler finally threw it back, he threw it hard and low, and Riley had to scramble to catch it, dropping to her knees on the dirty floor while students flowed around her like water around a stone. "You look good down there," Madison said, loud enough for nearby students to hear. "It's where you belong." Something inside Riley cracked a little, a fracture in the careful control she'd been maintaining. She looked up at Madison, really looked at her, and for just a second, she let Madison see the anger behind her eyes, the barely restrained fury that she'd been swallowing for weeks. Madison's smile faltered just for an instant, and then she laughed, but it sounded forced. "Did the ghost just give me a dirty look?" Madison said to her friends. "I'm so scared." Blake laughed and they moved on, and Riley got to her feet, her knees aching, her face burning. Around her the hallway had mostly emptied, students in classrooms now, the bell about to ring. She made it to math class just as Mr. Palmer was closing the door, and she slid into her seat in the back, keeping her head down, her hands shaking slightly in her lap where no one could see. That afternoon, she took the long way home, walking through the residential streets instead of the main road, needing time to think. The houses here were small and neat, with yards that were starting to look shaggy as autumn turned toward winter. Leaves covered the sidewalks in wet piles, and the air smelled like wood smoke and rain. Riley's thoughts circled the same question over and over. How long could she keep doing this? How many more weeks until she graduated and could leave this place behind? And was it worth it, enduring daily humiliation just to avoid making waves? She was so lost in thought that she almost walked past the small building tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. It was narrow, with a plain wooden door and a single window covered by blinds. But there was a sign hanging above the door, hand-painted in black letters. Kim's Self-Defense and Discipline. Riley stopped, staring at it. She'd walked this way before and never noticed the place, but now it seemed to glow with possibility. She thought about her father, about the promise she'd made to him years ago not to fight, not to cause trouble, to keep her training private and only use it in genuine emergencies. But she also thought about Madison's face, about Blake's laughter, about the feeling of her knees hitting the dirty hallway floor. She didn't go in that day. She walked past it, went home, did her homework, ate dinner, and went through her forms in her room like always. But the knowledge of that building, that sign, that possibility, sat in the back of her mind like a seed waiting to germinate. The next day, Madison escalated. Riley still didn't understand why she'd become a target specifically. Maybe it was just bad luck, being the new girl in a school where the social hierarchy was already established. Maybe Madison saw something in Riley that threatened her, or maybe Madison was just bored and cruel. The reason didn't matter much in the end. What mattered was that during lunch, Madison walked past Riley's table and accidentally knocked Riley's water bottle onto her lap, soaking her jeans. Riley jumped up, water dripping down her legs, and Madison just smiled, all innocence. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Madison said in a tone that made it clear she wasn't sorry at all. "You should probably go change. Oh wait, I forgot, you don't have any friends to lend you clothes. Guess you'll just have to walk around like you peed yourself all day." The cafeteria wasn't silent. It never was, but Riley felt like everyone was watching, even though most people probably hadn't even noticed. She grabbed her bag and walked out, her footsteps squeaking on the tile floor, her wet jeans cold and uncomfortable against her skin. She made it to the bathroom and locked herself in a stall, sitting on the closed toilet lid, trying not to cry. She didn't cry. She wouldn't give them that. But she wanted to, badly, and that almost felt worse. She spent the rest of lunch in the bathroom, using paper towels to try to dry her jeans under the hand dryer, only marginally successful. When the bell rang, she emerged and went to her afternoon classes, ignoring the occasional whisper or laugh that might or might not have been about her. By the time school ended, she was exhausted, wrung out from maintaining her composure. This time, when she walked past Kim's Self-Defense and Discipline, she didn't hesitate. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The interior was Spartan, mats on the floor, mirrors on one wall, a few punching bags hanging in the corner. It smelled like sweat and leather and something clean and sharp, maybe eucalyptus. There was a small office area to one side with a desk buried under papers, and in the center of the mats, a woman was working through a kata, her movements fluid and precise. Riley stood there uncertain until the woman finished and turned to face her. She was probably in her 50s, Korean-American if Riley had to guess, with short black hair threaded with silver and the kind of solid, compact build that spoke of a lifetime of training. Her eyes were dark and assessing, not unkind but not exactly welcoming either. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her voice neutral. Riley swallowed. "Are you Kim?" "I am." And you are? Riley Nakamura. Quote. She paused, not sure how to explain. I used to train in Tacoma, but we moved and I was wondering if you take new students. Kim studied her for a long moment, and Riley had the uncomfortable feeling of being X-rayed, like Kim could see through her oversized jacket and wet jeans to all the bruises and humiliations she'd been collecting. What style? Kim asked finally. Mostly Japanese jiu-jitsu, some aikido. I never tested for black belt. Kim's eyebrow raised slightly. That's serious training. Why'd you stop? Riley looked at the floor. My dad got transferred. We moved before I could test. And why are you here now? Kim's voice wasn't accusatory, just curious. Looking to start again? Or looking for something else? That was the question, wasn't it? Riley lifted her eyes to meet Kim's. I don't know, she said honestly. I need something. Kim was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Tell me something, Riley. When you say you need something, what is it you think you need? Power? Revenge? Confidence? Riley thought about it, really thought about it. Myself, she said finally. I feel like I've been disappearing and I need to not disappear. Something in Kim's expression softened just slightly. Come back tomorrow at 4, she said. We'll talk more. Bring workout clothes. She turned back to the mats, dismissing Riley without ceremony, and Riley left, stepping back out into the cool November afternoon with something fizzing in her chest that might have been hope. She came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Kim didn't ask about her life or why a high school student was coming to her dojo alone every afternoon. She just put Riley through her paces, testing her forms, her flexibility, her strength and endurance. Riley was surprised to find that most of her training had stuck. Her body remembered even if she'd spent months doing nothing but going through forms alone in her bedroom. But she was out of shape, her stamina shot, her confidence fragile. Kim was a hard instructor, demanding and precise. But there was something patient underneath the strictness, a sense that she understood more than she said. She didn't teach Riley any new fighting techniques at first. Instead, she focused on the basics: proper stance, breathing, balance. You can know 1,000 techniques, Kim said one afternoon, watching Riley hold a horse stance that made her thighs scream. But if you don't have balance, you have nothing. Balance in the body, balance in the mind. That's where real strength comes from. Riley didn't tell her father about the training. She wasn't ready to explain it, wasn't ready for his questions or concerns. She just said she joined an after-school club, which was vague enough to be believable. Her mother seemed pleased that Riley was doing something social, even if Riley didn't mention that the club was just her and one instructor in a quiet dojo where the only sounds were breathing and the slap of feet on mats. At school, nothing changed. Madison continued her campaign of casual cruelty, always just under the radar of adult attention. Blake and his friends played their part, making Riley feel small and powerless. The other students mostly ignored it. Either they didn't notice, or they were glad it wasn't them, or they figured it wasn't their business. Riley endured it, but now there was something different underneath her passive acceptance. Every humiliation fueled her training. Every mean comment became weight in her horse stance. Every shove became a reason to perfect her breakfalls. She was building something inside herself, brick by brick, and Madison didn't even know it. One evening in late November, as Riley was leaving the dojo, Kim called her back. "You're holding something in," Kim said, not looking at Riley but focusing on the punching bag she was adjusting. "Fear or anger or both. I can see it in your forms. You're technically good, but you're fighting yourself as much as you're fighting an invisible opponent." Riley didn't know what to say to that. Kim turned to face her, leaning against the bag. Whatever's happening in your life, you need to understand something. Training isn't about learning to hurt people. It's about learning to protect yourself and others, yes, but more than that, it's about learning to be centered in yourself, confident, balanced. If you're training because you want to hurt someone, you're training for the wrong reasons. I'm not, Riley started, then stopped. Was she? She thought about Madison, about the satisfaction she'd feel if she could just once make Madison feel as small and humiliated as Riley felt every day. But she also thought about her father's words years ago when she'd first started training. With knowledge comes responsibility. Never use what you learn unless you absolutely have to, and even then only enough to be safe. I just want them to stop, Riley said quietly. I just want to feel like I'm not nothing. Kim nodded slowly. Then keep training. But remember, the goal isn't to become someone who can hurt people. The goal is to become someone who doesn't need to. Those words stuck with Riley through the following weeks. She continued training every afternoon, pushing herself harder, feeling her body strengthen and her mind sharpen. At school, she began to notice small changes in herself. She stood a little straighter. She made eye contact more often. When Madison bumped into her in the hallway, Riley's balance held, and it was Madison who stumbled. It was a small thing, probably unnoticeable to everyone else. But Riley felt it, the first sign that she was becoming more solid, less ghost-like. December arrived with the first snow, just light flurries that melted on the sidewalks but made everything feel different, cleaner somehow. The school decorated for the holidays, and there was an energy in the halls, anticipation for the winter break that was only a few weeks away. Riley still ate lunch alone, still avoided the popular crowds, but she found herself caring less about it. Her world had expanded beyond the narrow confines of Cascade Valley High School. She had the dojo now, had Kim's quiet instruction and the meditative peace of training. It was enough. Then came the incident in the parking lot. Riley was heading to her car, an old Honda her parents had bought her when they moved, reliable but ugly, when she saw a cluster of students gathered near the back of the lot. She tried to walk past, but someone called out, "Hey, ghost girl, come here!" It was Blake standing with Tyler and Jake near Blake's truck, a massive thing with oversized tires and a Confederate flag sticker on the bumper that made Riley's stomach turn every time she saw it. Madison was there too, leaning against the truck like she owned it. Riley hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to keep walking, but a part of her was tired of running. She changed direction and walked toward them, keeping her face neutral, her hands relaxed at her sides. "What?" she asked, her voice steady. Madison smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. "We were just talking about you," she said, "about how sad it is that you don't have any friends. I mean, it's almost Christmas and you're all alone. Don't you have anyone who cares about you?" Riley didn't answer. She just stood there, waiting, sensing that this was leading somewhere worse. "We were thinking," Blake said, stepping forward, invading Riley's space in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate, "that maybe you should just transfer schools. Like, clearly you don't fit in here, nobody likes you, nobody wants you around. So why don't you just leave?" Something cold settled in Riley's stomach, but she kept her voice even. "I'll leave when I graduate," she said quietly, "just like everyone else." "See, that's the problem," Madison said, pushing off from the truck. "We don't want to wait that long. We want you gone now. You make this school depressing. You're like this black cloud of patheticness that just sucks the fun out of everything." Riley felt her jaw tighten. She thought about Kim's words. Balance in the body, balance in the mind. She took a slow breath, centering herself. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, and she was surprised by how firm her voice sounded. Blake laughed, but there was something uncertain in it. Listen to her, suddenly growing a spine. "What are you going to do if we make you leave? Fight all of us?" Riley looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the bravado to the insecurity underneath. Blake was a big guy, used to being the alpha, but there was weakness in his eyes, a need for validation that Madison fed by letting him play enforcer. Tyler and Jake were worse, just followers, no backbone of their own, and Madison was the real problem, the architect of all this cruelty, driven by something Riley still didn't fully understand. "I don't want to fight anyone," Riley said, and she meant it. "I just want to be left alone." "Too bad," Madison said, and then she nodded to Blake. Blake shoved Riley, both hands to her shoulders, hard enough that a month ago it would have sent her sprawling. But Riley had been training, and her body knew what to do. She shifted her weight, absorbed the energy, and stayed on her feet. Blake blinked, surprised, and shoved her again, harder. This time Riley actually moved with it, rolling back and sideways, and when she came up, she was balanced and steady, her eyes on Blake, but her awareness extending to all of them. "What the hell?" Tyler muttered. Blake's face darkened. He wasn't used to people not falling down when he pushed them. He came at her again, and Riley moved, not engaging, but not fleeing either, just positioning herself so that Blake's momentum carried him past her. He stumbled, caught himself, turned back with his fists raised. For a second, Riley thought he might actually swing at her, and she felt her body coil, ready to respond. But then a car horn blared nearby, a teacher's car pulling into the lot, and the moment broke. "This isn't over," Madison hissed, and they scattered, leaving Riley standing alone in the parking lot, her heart pounding, adrenaline singing through her veins. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in months, terrified and exhilarated all at once. That evening at the dojo, she told Kim what had happened. Not all of it, just the broad strokes. Students at school giving her trouble, a confrontation in the parking lot. Kim listened without interrupting, then had Riley run through her forms, correcting her stance, adjusting her balance. "You held your ground," Kim said finally. "That's good. But you need to understand something, Riley. Physical balance is just the start. You need mental balance too, emotional balance. If you're angry when you fight, you've already lost, because anger makes you sloppy. Fear makes you hesitate. You need to be calm, centered, present in the moment. That's the only way you'll be ready if things escalate." "What if they do?" Riley asked. "Escalate, I mean. What if it gets worse?" Kim met her eyes. "Then you defend yourself. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with the understanding that you have a right to your own safety and dignity. You use the minimum force necessary, you stay in control, and you never let them make you into someone you're not. That's the real test, not whether you can win a fight, but whether you can stay true to yourself while doing it." Riley nodded, feeling the truth of those words settle into her bones. She trained harder after that conversation, pushing herself until her muscles screamed and sweat stung her eyes. Kim introduced more advanced techniques, wrist locks, throws, pressure points, but always with the emphasis on control, on precision, on using an opponent's energy against them rather than relying on brute strength. At home, Riley's parents noticed she seemed different. Her mother commented that she seemed more confident, less withdrawn. Her father asked if she'd made friends at school, and Riley said she was working on it, which wasn't exactly a lie. She was making a friendship, just not with another student. She was becoming friends with herself, with the version of herself that had been buried under months of humiliation and fear. School became easier to endure. Not because the bullying stopped, it didn't, but because Riley's internal landscape had shifted. When Madison made a snide comment, Riley heard it, acknowledged it, and let it go without letting it sink into her skin. When Blake tried to intimidate her in the hallway, she moved around him like water flowing around a rock. Not confrontational, but not yielding either. The change was subtle, but people noticed. Some of the other students started nodding to her in the halls, small acknowledgements of her existence. A girl named Sophie, who sat near Riley in English class, started saying hi when they passed each other. It wasn't much, but it was something. Madison noticed too, and she didn't like it. The week before winter break, she upped her game. Riley was in the locker room after gym, changing back into her regular clothes, when Madison and two other girls, Ashley and a girl named Brittany, came in. Riley was alone. She always tried to be one of the first or last to change, to avoid exactly this kind of situation. But today, she'd been slower than usual, tired from a particularly hard training session the day before. "Look who it is," Madison said, her voice echoing off the tile walls. "Ghost girl, all alone. Again, do you ever get tired of being such a loser?" Riley pulled her shirt on, not responding, reaching for her jeans. Madison stepped closer, blocking her path to the bench where the rest of her clothes lay. "I'm talking to you," Madison said, her voice hardening. "I heard you," Riley said quietly, still not looking at her. "Can you move, please?" "Can you move, please?" Madison mimicked in a whiny voice. "God, you're so pathetic. Do you know what everyone says about you? They say you're weird. They say you're probably some kind of freak who—" "Madison, just leave me alone," Riley said, and there was an edge to her voice now, a warning that Madison either didn't hear or chose to ignore. "Or what?" Madison stepped even closer, right in Riley's space, invading it deliberately. "What are you going to do about it, ghost girl? You can't even stand up for yourself. You're weak. You're nothing." Something inside Riley went very still, very calm. She looked up at Madison, really looked at her, and saw not a powerful tormentor, but a scared girl lashing out because her own life was probably miserable in ways Riley didn't even know. And Riley realized something in that moment. She didn't hate Madison. She pitied her. And that realization diffused the anger that had been building, replacing it with something closer to sadness. "I think you need this more than I do," Riley said softly, so softly that only Madison could hear. "You need someone to feel worse than you do. And I'm not going to give you that anymore." Madison's face flushed red, and for a second, Riley thought she might get violent. But then Ashley touched Madison's arm, murmuring something, and Madison stepped back, her expression twisted with something that might have been fury or might have been shame. "You're going to regret this," Madison said, but her voice was shaking. "I'm going to make you regret ever coming to this school." She turned and left, Ashley and Brittany trailing after her, and Riley stood there in the empty locker room, her heart pounding. She finished dressing slowly, her hands steady, despite the adrenaline crash starting to hit. She'd stood up for herself without throwing a punch, without losing her temper, without becoming the kind of person she didn't want to be. It felt like a victory, even though she knew Madison meant what she'd said. This wasn't over. Winter break came as a relief, 2 weeks away from Cascade Valley High School and all its complicated social dynamics. Riley spent the time training at the dojo, which stayed open through the holidays. Kim gave her a small gift on Christmas Eve, a book on martial arts philosophy, old and worn with notes in the margins. "This was my instructor's," Kim told her. "He gave it to me when I earned my black belt. I think you're ready for it." Riley treasured that book, reading it slowly, absorbing the wisdom about balance and control and the responsibility that came with knowledge. She practiced her forms in the garage when the weather was too bad to walk to the dojo. She spent time with her parents, enjoying the normalcy of family dinners and movie nights, storing up the warmth against whatever was coming when school started again. January arrived cold and bleak, and with it came the return to Cascade Valley High School. Riley felt ready, or as ready as she could be. She'd transformed over the past 2 months, not dramatically. She still looked like the same small, quiet girl, but internally. She carried herself differently now, with a centeredness that came from knowing who she was and what she was capable of. Madison noticed immediately. On the first day back, Riley was at her locker when Madison walked past with her entourage. She stopped, looked Riley up and down, and smiled that sharp, mean smile. "Did you have a nice break, Ghost Girl?" Madison asked. "I hope you enjoyed it because this semester is going to be hell for you." Riley met her eyes steadily. "If that's what you need to do," she said calmly, "then do it. But I'm not afraid of you anymore." It was the wrong thing to say, or maybe the right thing, depending on perspective. Madison's smile disappeared, replaced by cold fury. "You should be," she said, and walked away, her friends following. The campaign that followed was more intense than anything before. Madison seemed determined to break Riley, to prove that she was still in control. She spread rumors that Riley was stealing from other students, that she was mentally unstable, that she'd threatened people. None of it was true, but rumors didn't need truth to be damaging. Riley found her locker vandalized multiple times, her books torn, her things stolen. Someone started a social media account dedicated to mocking her, posting unflattering photos and cruel captions. It was relentless. But Riley had Kim's training and her own growing strength to fall back on. She reported the social media account, and it got taken down. She kept her head up in the hallways, refusing to be cowed. When Madison tried to trip her in the cafeteria, Riley's balance held, and it was Madison who looked foolish. When Blake cornered her in the parking lot again, this time with Connor and Jake, Riley didn't back down. She stood her ground, her hands relaxed, her posture balanced, and something in her eyes made them hesitate. They didn't touch her that day, just threw insults and left. Through it all, Riley kept training. Kim introduced her to sparring, controlled matches where Riley learned to read her opponent, to anticipate and counter, to stay calm under pressure. She wasn't fighting to win, she was fighting to learn. Kim brought in some of her other students, adults who trained in the evenings, and Riley learned to adapt to different sizes and styles, to be flexible and responsive rather than rigid and predictable. One evening in late January, after a particularly bruising sparring session, Kim sat Riley down on the edge of the mat. "You're ready," Kim said simply. Riley looked at her, uncertain. "Ready for what?" "For whatever's coming. You've learned the techniques, built the strength, developed the control. But more importantly, you've learned to be centered in yourself. You know who you are and what you stand for. That's more valuable than any fighting skill." "I don't want to fight them," Riley said quietly. "I just want them to leave me alone." "I know, but sometimes the only way to get peace is to be willing to fight for it. Not because you want to hurt someone, but because you're willing to stand up for your own dignity and safety. There's a difference between being aggressive and being assertive. You've learned to be assertive without losing yourself. That's rare." Riley absorbed those words, feeling their weight. She thought about Madison and Blake and all the others, about the months of harassment and humiliation, and she realized that she wasn't the same person who'd started at Cascade Valley High School back in October. That girl had been scared and alone and desperate to be invisible. This girl, this Riley, was none of those things. February brought an unexpected development. A new student who actually talked to Riley. His name was Derek Chen, a transfer from California, and he didn't know about the social hierarchy or Riley's status as the school pariah. He sat next to her in calculus class and asked to borrow a pencil, and when Riley handed him one, he smiled and said thanks like it was the most natural thing in the world. The next day, he sat next to her again, and the day after that, he asked if she understood the homework. They started studying together in the library, and Riley found herself enjoying the simple act of conversation with someone her own age who didn't treat her like she was invisible or pathetic. Derek was smart and funny in a quiet way, and he didn't seem to care that Riley wasn't popular. He had his own struggles, she learned. His parents had divorced, and he'd moved with his mom to get a fresh start. He understood what it was like to be the outsider. Madison hated it. Riley could see the calculation in Madison's eyes whenever she saw Riley and Derek together. For weeks, Madison held back, maybe trying to figure out how to use this new development to her advantage. Then, in early March, she made her move. Derek had mentioned that he liked Riley, more than just as a study partner. It was awkward and sweet, and Riley had been honest with him. She liked him too, but her life was complicated right now, and she needed to handle some things before she could think about dating. Derek understood, or said he did, and they'd continued being friends, the unspoken possibility hovering between them. Madison found out somehow. Maybe she'd overheard, maybe someone had told her, and she decided to exploit it. One afternoon, Riley was leaving the library when she found Derek in the hallway, surrounded by Blake, Tyler, and Jake. They weren't touching him, but they didn't need to. Their size and posture were threat enough. "Your girlfriend's a freak," Blake was saying, his voice loud enough to carry. "Why would you want to hang out with someone like that?" "Are you a freak too?" Derek's face was red, angry or embarrassed or both. "She's not. We're just friends, and she's not a freak. Leave her alone." "Leave her alone," Tyler mimicked. "Oh, that's cute. You think you can protect her?" Riley felt ice in her stomach. This was her fault. Derek was being targeted because of her. She started walking toward them, her hands relaxed but ready, her mind already calculating angles and options. But before she could get there, Madison appeared, stepping between Derek and Blake's group. Boys," Madison said sweetly. "Don't be mean to the new kid. It's not his fault he doesn't understand how things work here." She turned to Derek, her smile sharp. "Let me explain it to you, Derek. Riley is a nobody. She's weird, she's boring, and she doesn't have any friends for a reason. If you keep hanging out with her, people are going to think you're just as pathetic as she is. Is that really what you want?" "I don't care what people think," Derek said, and Riley felt a surge of warmth toward him for saying it. Madison's expression hardened. "You should care. Because if you keep being friends with her, we're going to make your life as miserable as hers. Your choice." Riley reached them then, stepping into the circle, her presence changing the dynamic. "Derek, you okay?" she asked quietly. "I'm fine," Derek said, but his eyes were uncertain. Riley looked at Madison. "This is between you and me," she said, her voice low and steady. "Leave him out of it." "Oh, now she's brave," Madison said, looking around at her audience. "Trying to protect your boyfriend? That's almost cute, ghost girl. But you can't protect him. You can't even protect yourself." Something in Riley snapped, not into anger but into clarity. She was done. Done with the harassment, done with the threats, done with letting Madison control her life. She met Madison's eyes and said very clearly, "I'm not afraid of you. Not anymore. Do whatever you think you need to do, but I'm done playing your games." The hallway had gone quiet, students stopping to watch the confrontation. Madison's face flushed with fury. "You're going to regret that," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm going to destroy you." "Try," Riley said simply, and walked away, Derek following her. That night, Kim watched Riley go through her forms with a critical eye. "Something happened," Kim said when Riley finished. It wasn't a question. Riley told her about the confrontation, about Derek, about Madison's threat. Kim listened, nodding slowly. "And how do you feel?" she asked when Riley finished. "Ready," Riley said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Whatever comes next, I'm ready." Kim smiled, a rare expression that transformed her usually stern face. "Good, because I think it's time for you to test. Not for a belt, belts don't matter much in the real world, but to prove to yourself what you're capable of. Saturday, 10 a.m. We'll do a full test. Forms, sparring, board breaking, everything. You pass that, and I'll know you're really ready for whatever comes, Riley agreed, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She spent the next few days preparing, running through her forms until they were flawless, sparring with Kim's other students until she could barely stand. When Saturday came, she was exhausted but focused, her mind clear of everything except the present moment. The test was brutal. Kim pushed her harder than ever before, finding every weakness, testing every technique. Riley sparred 4 different opponents, each one fresh while she was increasingly tired. She broke boards with punches and kicks, demonstrating control and power. She answered questions about philosophy and application, explaining not just how to do techniques but why and when. By the end, she was dripping with sweat, her muscles trembling, but she'd done it. She'd passed. "You're not just technically proficient," Kim said as Riley sat on the mat, trying to catch her breath. "You understand what it means to be a martial artist. You have control, discipline, and respect for what you've learned. Whatever happens at your school, remember this moment. Remember what you're capable of, and remember why you trained, not to hurt people, but to protect yourself and stand up for what's right." Riley nodded, too exhausted to speak, but feeling something settle into place inside her. She was ready. She didn't know what form the confrontation would take, didn't know when or where it would happen, but she knew it was coming, and she knew she could handle it. The breaking point came the following week, and it came in a way Riley hadn't anticipated. She was in the girls' locker room after gym class, changing quickly as usual, when Madison and her friends came in. But this time, there were boys with them, Blake, Tyler, Connor, and Riley's stomach dropped. Boys weren't allowed in the girls' locker room, and their presence was a violation that made everything suddenly more dangerous. "What are you doing?" Riley asked, her voice sharp. "You can't be in here." "Can't we?" Blake said, grinning. "Who's going to stop us?" "You." Other girls were in the locker room too, and they'd gone silent, uncomfortable but not willing to intervene. Riley felt anger rise in her throat, hot and sharp, but she pushed it down, staying centered. "Leave," she said firmly. "Now." Madison laughed. "You don't give orders here, ghost girl, but you know what? You're right, the boys shouldn't be in here. Maybe you should leave instead." She nodded to her friends, and before Riley could react, multiple hands grabbed her, pushing her toward the door. Not the door to the main hallway, the door that connected to the boys' locker room. Riley fought, really fought for the first time, using the techniques Kim had taught her. She twisted out of one girl's grip, used a wrist lock on another, but there were too many of them, and they were ready for resistance. They shoved her through the door into the boys' locker room, and Riley stumbled, catching herself against a locker. Behind her, she heard the door lock click. The boys' locker room was partially full, guys from the gym class before hers, in various states of undress. They looked up in shock as Riley appeared, and for a moment everything was frozen, silent. Then someone laughed, and the spell broke. "What the hell?" someone said. "Madison pushed her in here," another voice answered, laughter in it. "This is going to be good." Riley's heart was pounding, her face burning with humiliation and anger. She could hear Madison and her friends laughing on the other side of the locked door, could hear them talking about taking pictures to post online, about how this would ruin Riley's reputation completely. And Riley realized in that moment that she'd had enough. More than enough. This wasn't just bullying anymore. This was assault, was harassment, was a level of cruelty that had crossed every possible line. She turned and kicked the door, not gently, right next to the lock. The door shuddered but held. She kicked it again and again, using every ounce of strength and technique Kim had taught her, putting her whole body into it. On the fourth kick, the lock gave way and the door slammed open, catching Madison in the shoulder and sending her stumbling backward. Riley stepped through, and the girls on the other side scattered, their laughter dying. All except Madison, who stood her ground, her face twisted with fury and maybe a little fear. "You're going to pay for that," Madison said, but her voice wavered. "No," Riley said quietly, "you are." She didn't give Madison time to react. She'd spent months enduring, months training, months preparing for this moment. She closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps and grabbed Madison's wrist, applying a control hold that Kim had taught her, just enough pressure to hurt without causing real damage. Madison yelped, trying to pull away, but Riley held firm, her grip like iron. "You're hurting me!" Madison shrieked, and Ashley moved forward like she might help, but Riley's eyes stopped her cold. "I could hurt you," Riley said, her voice steady and cold. "I could hurt you a lot worse than this. But I'm not going to, because I'm not like you. I don't need to hurt people to feel powerful." She released Madison's wrist and stepped back, her hands open and relaxed at her sides. "But I'm done being your target. I'm done letting you make me feel small. And if you ever touch me again, if you ever come near me again, I will defend myself. Do you understand?" Madison cradled her wrist, her face pale, and for the first time since Riley had met her, she looked uncertain. "You can't. This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Riley said. "It's over because I say it is. You don't control me anymore, Madison. You never really did." She turned and walked away, her legs shaking, adrenaline making her feel light and hollow. Behind her, she heard Madison start to cry, messy and genuine, and Riley felt no satisfaction in it, just a bone-deep tiredness. She went to the main office and reported everything. The boys in the girls' locker room, being shoved through the door, the months of harassment. She gave them Madison's name, Blake's name, all of them. She'd kept quiet for so long, trying not to make waves, but that was over now. The vice principal, Mr. Cordova, listened with an increasingly serious expression. He called in other witnesses, including some of the girls who'd been in the locker room and had seen everything. By the end of the day, Madison, Blake, Tyler, and several others were suspended pending investigation. The school couldn't ignore what had happened, not with multiple witnesses and clear violations of school policy. Riley went home that afternoon, feeling drained but lighter, like she'd been carrying a weight for months and had finally set it down. Her parents noticed immediately that something was different, and this time Riley told them everything. About the bullying, the harassment, the training she'd been doing with Kim. Her father was angry that she hadn't told them sooner, but also proud of how she'd handled it. Her mother cried and hugged her tight, and that night they had a long family conversation about communication and trust and standing up for yourself. The next few days were strange. Riley was treated like a minor celebrity by some students, with people coming up to her to say they were glad someone had finally stood up to Madison. Others avoided her, afraid to be associated with someone who'd caused such drama. Derek stayed by her side through all of it, and Riley was grateful for his steady presence. The school's investigation proceeded slowly, with administrators interviewing students and reviewing security camera footage. The outcome, when it came, was more comprehensive than Riley had expected. Madison was suspended for 2 weeks and required to attend counseling. Blake and his friends received similar punishments. Several students, who'd witnessed but not reported previous incidents, were disciplined for their inaction. The school instituted new policies about bullying and harassment, though Riley was cynical about how effective they'd actually be. But the real change wasn't in the policies or punishments. It was in the social atmosphere of the school. Madison's power had been broken, her carefully constructed persona of untouchable Queen Bee shattered. She came back from suspension subdued, avoiding Riley entirely, her former friends scattered. Blake and his crew lost their swagger, aware that their actions had consequences. Riley, meanwhile, found herself with something she'd never expected: respect. Students nodded to her in the halls, and not out of pity or fear, but genuine acknowledgement. Sophie from English class invited her to sit with her group at lunch, and Riley discovered that there was a whole subset of students she'd never noticed before. Kids who weren't popular, but weren't losers either. Just normal people living their lives. Derek continued to be a constant presence, and eventually Riley worked up the courage to say yes when he asked her to see a movie. She continued training with Kim, but the desperate urgency was gone, replaced by genuine love of the practice. Kim was pleased with her progress and started talking about competitions, about demonstrations, about pathways Riley could take if she wanted to continue martial arts beyond high school. Riley wasn't sure what she wanted yet, but she was grateful for the options. One afternoon in April, as Riley was leaving the dojo, Kim called her back one more time. "You did well," Kim said, and coming from her, that was high praise. "You faced your fear, you stood up for yourself, and you didn't become someone cruel in the process. That's the hardest part of martial arts, learning when to fight and when to walk away, and how to fight without losing yourself." "I couldn't have done it without you," Riley said honestly. "You taught me how to be strong." Kim shook her head. "I taught you some techniques. You taught yourself how to be strong. That was always in you, Riley. You just needed to remember it was there." As spring progressed towards summer and graduation approached, Riley found herself reflecting on the past year.